What if I told you that the American dream is dying? That the endless pursuit of more goods and services is no longer satisfying or sustainable? That the past decade has exposed the flaws and failures of consumerism? Come, let's find out more. American consumerism, the theory that the consumption of goods is good for the economy, has been a driving force in the U.S. economy for many years. It began to take off in the 1920s after the end of World War I and saw a huge boom after World War II, with a steep increase in the purchase of home appliances and cars. However, the past decade has seen a significant decline in American consumerism. The COVID-19 pandemic has radically affected the American economy, reducing spending by American households on material goods, air travel, leisure activities, and the use of automobiles. This decline in consumer spending has had a profound impact on the U.S. economy, which is heavily reliant on consumer spending. In 2020, American residents spent around $12.5 trillion on durable and non-durable goods and services, which was more than $500 billion less than the previous year. It is projected that it will take until 2022 before personal consumption expenditure recovers to where it was in 2019. Given the population growth of 2.5 million people per year, only in 2023 will the average American spend the same amount as in 2019. The fall in consumption, however, has not been even across sectors. The collapse in consumption has been heavily concentrated in services, while consumption of goods has had a very modest decline. In some sectors, such as food, housing, and financial services, consumers are expected to spend more in 2020 than they did in 2019. People still need to eat, and they now cook more at home than before and manage their money. Specifically, consumer spending on food and beverages purchased for off-premises consumption saw an $84 billion increase from 2019 to 2020, the largest growth of any sector. Coming second, housing, utilities, and fuel increased by $59 billion. Consumer durables see an increase of $19 billion, while financial services and insurance increased by $10 billion. For other aspects of the American economy, the pandemic has resulted in a severe contraction in consumer spending, with some sectors recovering faster than others. For example, food services and accommodations decreased by $186 billion, and transportation decreased by $174 billion. The past decade has been a tragic one for American consumerism, with the COVID-19 pandemic causing a significant decline in consumer spending. However, there are signs of recovery, and it is hoped that by 2023, the average American will be spending the same amount as they did in 2019. This recovery will be crucial for the U.S. economy, which is heavily reliant on consumer spending. However, the uneven impact of the pandemic on different sectors highlights the need for a more balanced and sustainable approach to economic growth in the future. Inflation is a term that refers to the general increase in prices and fall in the purchasing value of money. When we talk about inflation expectations, we're referring to what people think inflation will be in the future. These expectations can influence economic decisions such as spending and saving, wage negotiations, and business pricing. Recently, there's been a rise in inflation expectations for the year ahead in the United States. This means that consumers are expecting prices to increase at a faster rate in the coming year. Specifically, Americans expect prices to climb at an annual rate of 4.5% over the next year, up from 4.4% expected earlier in the month. They also see costs rising 3.2% over the next 5 to 10 years. This rise in inflation expectations is significant because it indicates that consumers are worried about the potential for higher prices in the future. Despite the recent easing of prices at the pump, one-year gas price expectations rose to their highest reading since June 2022, and five-year gas price expectations are their highest since March 2022. The rise in inflation expectations has had an impact on the financial markets as well. Following the report on inflation expectations, Treasury yields combined and the dollar strengthened. The S&P 500, a stock market index that measures the stock performance of 500 large companies listed on stock exchanges in the United States, also advanced. The University of Michigan's Consumer Sentiment Index, which measures consumers' confidence in the U.S. economy, improved from the previously reported figure to 61.3 on brighter views of their finances. However, the gauge is sitting at a 6-month low as views about the short and long-term economic outlook worsened from October. The rise in U.S. consumer year-ahead inflation expectations indicates that consumers are bracing for higher prices in the future. This has implications for the economy as a whole, as it could influence spending and saving decisions, wage negotiations, and business pricing. It also highlights the importance of monitoring inflation and managing it effectively to ensure economic stability. In recent times, there has been a noticeable trend among Americans who are increasingly dipping into their retirement savings to cover their bills. This is a significant shift, as traditionally, retirement savings are meant to be a safety net for individuals in their post-work years. The primary reasons driving this trend are the rising cost of living and mounting financial pressures. Specifically, housing and medical bills have been cited as the main expenses that are leading Americans to withdraw from their retirement funds. According to data from Fidelity Investments, about 2.3% of workers took what is known as a hardship withdrawal from their retirement savings in the last quarter. This is up from 1.8% a year earlier. A hardship withdrawal is an emergency withdrawal from a retirement plan, permitted when the plan holder has no other resources to meet an immediate and heavy financial need. The top two reasons given for these withdrawals were to avoid foreclosure for homeowners or eviction for renters and to cover medical expenses. These are critical needs, and it's clear that some Americans are finding it necessary to use their retirement savings to meet these immediate financial challenges. Interestingly, this trend is not just limited to the less affluent. Even Americans outside the wealthiest quintile have been found to have less cash on hand now than they did when the COVID-19 pandemic began. This suggests that the financial impact of the pandemic and the associated economic downturn have been widespread, affecting a broad swath of the population. In addition to hardship withdrawals, some Americans are also taking loans against their retirement accounts. In the third quarter, 2.8% of 401k retirement account participants took a loan against their account, up from 2.4% in the third quarter of the previous year. Overall, about 1 in 6 workers, or 17.6%, had an outstanding loan. This was up from 17.2% in the last quarter and 16.8% in the third quarter of the previous year. Loans taken against 401k savings generally must be paid back over as long as 5 years with interest. However, some workers have been taking what is known as an in-service withdrawal, where employers allow withdrawals that include taxes and penalties but are not required to be paid back. In the last quarter, 3.2% of participants took an in-service withdrawal, up half a percentage point from a year ago. Overall, the average retirement account balance decreased slightly from the previous quarter. The average 401k balance was $107,700, down 4% from the second quarter. Over the past 5 years, the average 401k balance was essentially unchanged. This slowdown in profit growth is putting pressure on the Chinese authorities to provide more support to manufacturers. This is because the global demand for goods is not as strong as it used to be, which is affecting the profitability of these firms. For the first 10 months of 2023, profits slid 7.8% from a year earlier. This is a smaller decline than the 9% decline seen in the first 9 months. This suggests that while the situation is improving, the recovery is slow, and there is still a long way to go. In response to this, the Chinese authorities have been implementing policy support measures. However, these measures have only had a modest effect so far, which is increasing the pressure on the authorities to roll out more stimulus. But what if consumerism is not the only way to live? What if there are alternatives that are more fulfilling, ethical, and sustainable? What if we can change our habits and values before it's too late? Comment your thoughts on this, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.